Hello, members of the World Organization of Systems and Cybernetics. My name is Shan Turnbull. I live in Sydney, Australia. First, I'd like to thank our president, Raul Espejo, for inviting me to present this online lecture. It's about managing the complexity of climate change. My full paper can be downloaded from the Social Science Research Network. As a discussion paper, I'd like to invite suggestions on how system scientists might best educate our political leaders and their constituents about the cybernetic law of requisite variety. This is urgently required for them to understand why and how they can best manage the complexity of global warming. Global warming is the first example at a global level of what is described as the tragedy of the commons. Previously, this type of wicked problem only arose in local communities when individuals or groups overexploited life-sustaining resources to deny them for everyone. Corporations can involve their shareholders in wicked problems. This occurs when their corporation consumes resources that cannot be recycled or reused to deny creating a circular economy to sustain humanity for eternity. Since pre-modern times, humans have learned how to solve wicked problems by adopting self-governing networks found in living things. Components of this ecological form of governance are described as holons. A hierarchy of holons is described as a holarchy, but they are radically different from a hierarchy. A defining feature of self-governing holons is that they introduce a requisite variety of dual complementary and/or contrary behavior found throughout nature. This yin-yang relationship is illustrated by DNA. It hardwires humans with dual behavior. Examples are approach avoidance, fight or flight, cooperation and competition, trust and suspicion, and so on. However, command and control hierarchies inhibit, deny, and/or punish such behavior, creating disasters. Ecological governance facilitates and depends upon replicating dual characteristics as is found throughout the universe. Holonic organizations can be both centralized and decentralized, autonomous and integrated, top-down, bottom-up, ordered or chaotic. The founding CEO of Visa Card Business combined the words chaos and order to describe holonic organizations as chaotic. Buckminster Fuller combined the words Tensional Integrity to create the word Tensegrity to describe how novel outcomes can emerge from complementary contrary relationships. For example, his geodetic domes allow the greatest land area to be covered with the least material. Tensegrity allows DNA to economize the data required to be embedded in animals to generate a requisite variety of behavior to permit them to survive birth, become self-governing, and reproduce in unknowable, dynamic, complex environments. The checks and balances introduced by Tensegrity also provide a process for our brains to become self-regulating components of ourselves, to become self-governing, an outcome achieved without markets, hierarchy, or even a central authority like a chief executive neuron. Lynn Oshton shared the Economics Prize in 2009 for identifying how organizations can likewise become self-governing without the need for markets or hierarchy. Ironically, she shared the prize with Oliver Williamson, who researched markets and hierarchies. As a political scientist, Oshton used the language of her discipline to describe how wicked problems can be governed. This was by organizers forming what she described as polycentric republics. It was rewarding to realize that my PhD dissertation contained studies of firms that possessed polycentric republics. All my case studies involve stakeholder-governed enterprises that introduced a variety of bottom-up as well as top-down communication and control channels amongst a variety of control centers. So I realized that in the 1970s, I'd incorporated two non-profit organizations in Australia that had formed polycentric republics. As the honorary Chief Executive Officer of the non-incorporated Australian National Ski Federation, I wrote its first corporate constitution that federated each of its self-governing state-controlling bodies. I also joined the single board of the Australian Association of Company Directors. To motivate members in each state, I rewrote its constitution to create almost self-governing state chapters. Figure 6.1 of my thesis outlines the components of the Mondragon cooperative system with dates of establishment. This obscures the polycentralism that is strikingly illustrated in figure 6.3, showing the control network of Mondragon activities. Table 6.1 shows the Holland typology of Mondragon that neatly integrates into the hierarchy of the universe, shown in rows 10 and 11 of table 3.8. The visa organization likewise fits this pattern as included in row 12. Cybernetician pioneer Ross Ashby stated that the law of requisite variety, like the law of conservation of energy, absolutely prohibits any direct and simple magnification, but it does not prohibit supplementation. System scientists also need to explain to social scientists Ashby's statement that the truths of cybernetics are not conditional on their being derived from some other branch of science. Cybernetics has its own foundation. Notwithstanding these truths, so ingrained is the habit of thinking by social scientists that government regulators around the world expend huge resources attempting to directly regulate complexity. They compound their problem by likewise using hierarchies in their attempts to regulate the complexity of private hierarchies. My research revealed the possibility of adding a requisite variety of polycentric republics to existing hierarchical firms so that they can become supplementary co-regulators from the bottom up. This possibility is illustrated on a generic basis in the figure. It shows how elements of ecological governance can be introduced by corporate constitutions establishing a requisite variety of stakeholder councils. In practice, many more self-elected, self-governing stakeholder republics may be required to adequately amplify regulation for the CEO and or for governments to reliably and comprehensively manage complexity. Another crucial change is to separate the power to manage a business from the power to govern its corporation. This is highlighted in the simplified figure. Without a separation of power, directors obtain absolute power to identify and manage their systemic, unethical conflicts of self-interest to corrupt absolutely themselves, the organization, and society. The separation of powers also reduces data processing overload for directors. Stafford Beer founded Management Cybernetics with its viable systems management and Tensegrity. These management processes did not involve legal contestability and so enforceable checks and balances of Tensegrity. Tensegrity is produced in the Kiritsi Group, a citizens' utility board established by Ralph Nader, and the watchdog boards I established to fund two public corporations. The introduction of bytes to analyze communications and control signals has extended the science of cybernetics from the animal and the machine to become the science of governing organization. Bytes are represented by perturbation in energy or matter that make a difference. The resiliency of living things to thrive and reproduce in unknowable, dynamic, complex environments favors those that can minimize energy and or materials. This explains why DNA hardwires variety into the behavior of living things to amplify the regulation required for their self-governance and survival. The human brain indicates the crucial role of minimizing bytes for survival. While our brains may only represent 2% of our body weight, they consume 20% of our body energy, even when resting. The existence of ecological firms in the US, UK, and Europe demonstrates that no changes in the law are required to introduce elements of ecological governance. Self-funding tax incentives for shareholders to convert existing firms into ecological forms are outlined in the appendix of my 1975 book on democratizing the wealth of nations. Shareholders would paradoxically obtain higher profits quicker and with less risk by giving their equity to stakeholders over a 20-year period. The introduction of such endowment corporations could introduce manifold operating advantages in addition to countering global wicked problems. These are described in my many articles on reforming the theories and practice of capitalism. The more notable being corporations would become locally controlled at human scale, reducing pollution, inequality, enriching democracy while funding a universal well-being income to reduce the size and cost of government. May I look forward to members of the World Organization of Systems and Cybernetics participating in the awesome challenge of developing student, adult, and political education programs to counter existential threats to humanity. Thank you very much for your attention.